Hi all, I am Disha Shukla, and here in this session we are going to discuss about the technicalities in the PCM in delta modulation. So digital signal digitization means converting an analog signal to a digital signal, and this operation involves two processes, that is sampling and quantization. The main advantage of digitization in its resistance to distortion. It is much easier to reliably transmit a digital signal over a long distance than an analog signal. Also, the digital signals can be easily stored without distortion. There are many applications where the digital signal processing is used, such as the radars and sonars, biomedicals, speech communication, etc. There are popular digitization techniques such as pulse code modulation and delta modulation. Now we have already seen what is pulse code modulation, what is delta modulation, what is sampling, what is digitization, etc. But technically all these terms, what do they actually do? That we'll be seeing here in this session. So this is the whole figure that shows how the whole PCM takes place, that is what happens in sampling, what happens in quantization, and what finally the encoding does. So the first one, sampling. Here first observe the obtaining signal values from the continuous signal at a regular time intervals. This process is known as sampling. Analog signals can be sampled and converted into digital signals, that is discrete signals. The quality of the signals depend on the sampling rate or the frequency. Say if Ts is the sampling interval, then Fs is equal to 1 divided by Ts is the sampling frequency. The discrete time signal can be represented as xn, x of n is equal to n. Those formulas means sampling just extracts the signal values at all integer multiples of Ts of 5 into xn is not a digital signal because xn can be any number from the continuous range. The figure illustrates the sampling process. Now, the next process is the quantization process. So, in the quantization process, here what does happen is in the previous section we have already see how sampling produces a sequence of numbers which can be any number from the continuous range, which means infinite values for each number. This section represents each number from the continuous range using finite number of digits. This is called quantization. There are two techniques that are used for digitization, as we already know, that is PCM and DM. Now PCM involves three processes or the steps to digitize a signal. First, the analog signal is sampled, then the sampled signal is quantized. After that, the quantized values are encoded. Now sampling was the first step, as we already know. The analog signal is sampled every t of s seconds. Ts refers to the sample interval or the period. There are three sampling methods as we have already seen in the video. The first one is the ideal, natural, the another is at the top, and these all are shown in the figure. Sampling steps produces a series of pulses with amplitude values between the maximum and the minimum amplitude of the signal. These amplitudes are infinite values. Infinite values cannot be used in encoding step. They must be converted into finite values. This is the meaning of quantization process. Quantization process is implemented in the following manner. Say first one is that you assume that the original analog signal has instantaneous amplitudes between Vmin and Vmax. Divide the whole range into L zones or levels, each of height delta h. Now delta h is equal to Vmin minus Vmax divided by L. Now assigning a quantized value of 0 to L minus 1 to the midpoints of each zone. Then approximate the value of the sample amplitude to the quantized value. This is the whole process how the quantization happens. And finally, the last step is encoding. Encoding being the last step or the process, in this step the quantized values are converted to the numbers. The number of bits used for quantized value is given by n minus b log 2. So this is about what is the whole process, what is the technicality between of the whole PCM, what actually happens in sampling, quantization and encoding. Now the other method was delta modulation. Now as you know that in PCM we are giving the values between 0 to L. In the quantization you are giving the values between 0 to L, but the difference between the PCM and DM is that in DM only the two values are given. That is the difference between the PCM and DM is that the PCM finds the value of a signal amplitude for each samples rather than DM, which sends only the difference between the pulses. That means that if the amplitude value at a time tn plus 1 is greater than the amplitude value of the pulse at time tn, then the signal bit is equal to 1, or else the signal bit is equal to 0. So moving on towards the difference between the PCM and DM, we can state that PCM, first one is the difference between, the full form of them, that is the PCM is pulse code modulation and DM is delta modulation. In PCM, the feedback does not exist in the transmitter or the receiver, while in the DM, feedback exists in the transmitter. In PCM, per sample 4, 6 or 16 bits are used, whereas in DM it requires lowest transmitter bandwidth. Here only 1 bit is used per sample. PCM requires highest transmitter bandwidth, whereas DM requires lowest transmitter bandwidth. PCM is complex in terms of complexity of the implementation, while DM is simple in terms of complexity of the implementation. PCM has good signal to noise ratio, whereas DM has a poor signal to noise ratio. PCM is costly and DM is cheap. So this is all about the technicalities that exist in PCM. I show you how the whole process, that is how the sampling occurs, how the quantization occurs, and finally how the encoding occurs. Now when an analog signal is transmitted, there will be continuous values of it. So the first process, that is the sampling, it divides the whole signal into different small samples based on some predefined value t. Then each sample will be quantized based on the average of the 2 points that it has, making it the whole curve into square shapes. And then those quantized values will be encoded into 0 and 1, giving the whole output into an analog form. And finally, this is the difference between the PCM and the DM. I hope you are clear with it. If not, you can ask me. Until then, keep learning.